What's going on, everyone? I hope you had a great 4th of July. But whether you did or not, we are headed to one of the greatest tracks on the American motocross circuit, RedBud. I personally always look forward to this race, and you really can't beat the guys jumping the Rocco's Leap. That's always fun to see. Anyways, this is our race day update show where we go over all the injury updates, the new riders joining the field, rider storylines, points, track and weather conditions, fantasy, statistics, pretty much everything that you need to know before the gate drops. Alright, so the first thing we're going to get into is our injury updates, as well as going over the new riders rejoining the field. We do have some guys who are returning from injury and some guys that are just returning in general. Starting off with Drew Adams, he is returning from his broken finger. Unfortunately, his teammate Ty Masterpool is now going to be out. Sounds like he had a practice crash. No real details on the extent of his injury right now. Hopefully he can come back, because I'm sure he would like another chance to try to prove himself for next season. Casey Cochran is also going to be out after dislocating his shoulder in qualifying last weekend. At first it seemed like he might be able to return since it was a dislocation, but unfortunately it sounds like the call has been made to go ahead and call it a season. Really hate that for Casey because he just returned from injury. He had to skip the entire Supercross season and now he is out once again. Luckily, it does sound like he was able to secure a ride with that team next year, even though that's likely going to be the Husqvarna side, but either way, he should have a ride secured for next year, so at least he has that going for him. Then we still have the 4-star Yamaha riders that are out. Daxton Bennick is back on the bike as of this week. He's still working his way back from those concussions, and he will not be racing this weekend. Hopefully, we'll see him at some point this season, but it sounds like he'll be joining Casey Cochran on that Husqvarna team next year. Max Anstey is still working his way back from that leg fracture in Supercross. Pierce Brown is also back on the bike, but will not be racing this weekend either. And Cole Davies is working his way back from getting landed on at Salt Lake. And then I almost forgot, Caden Manier just had surgery on his thumb after tearing his UCL, so he is also out. So actually there is 5-star Yamaha riders out. And then unfortunately, Evan Ferry is still going to be out with his Achilles injury. They were targeting RedBud as his return date. He tore his Achilles at Anaheim 1, so it has been a reasonable amount of time. But now it sounds like he might not return to racing until next season. Then we have the torn ACL crew. Chance Hymas is going to be out for the rest of the season after tearing his ACL. Cameron McAdoo is back cycling after getting his ACL reconstructed, but he's still a ways out from returning. And then Gavin Towers just got his ACL reconstructed as well. Nick Romano is dealing with a shoulder injury, and he will not be racing this weekend. Styles Robertson is still dealing with that wrist injury, and at this point I feel like his career is kind of in question. Jet Reynolds is looking to return for Ironman. He's still coming back from that leg injury. And then we got to shout out Trevor Collip. About a month ago, he went down at Hangtown. And if you don't already know, he's been through an absolute miserable time. The short version is that he was finally able to be fully released from the hospital this week. He's able to finally be back up on his feet with the use of crutches. Sounds like his cognitive function is coming along quite well. So that's a lot better of a report than what we were getting early on. Love to hear that. And then switching gears to a returning rider, we have Carson Mumford potentially returning this weekend. He's been back on the bike for a little bit now. He's been riding some 450s, but it looks like he's on the 250 entry list. We have not seen him race motocross yet this season, so I'm curious to see if he does actually line up this weekend, but as of right now, it looks like he probably will. Moving over to the 450 class, Dylan Ferrandis is still recovering from that leg injury. Ken Roxon is still coming back from his ankle surgery. And it looks like we might have Marshall Welton lining back up after dealing with some knee injuries. Sounds like he had a torn ACL. I'm not sure exactly what type of surgery he had because it wasn't that long ago that he had the surgery. But he is now on the entry list, so it looks like he might be lining up this weekend. And then, of course, we have the big one. Chase Sexton is returning from being banged up, so that'll be interesting to see. And then we have a couple of other riders returning to the series. Antonio Cairoli will be debuting the Ducati in American Racing this weekend. This will be his first time racing in the AMA since 2022. And it sounds like he's going to be on a relatively stock bike, so I'm curious to see exactly how that goes. And then I also want to give a shout out to Kevin Morans, who is rejoining the series. He did race this race last year. He definitely only races a few select motocross rounds and seems to be more of a supercross specialist, but nonetheless, it's still great to see him out there and giving it a go. Moving on to our 250 points and storylines at the top, obviously we have Hayden Deegan. So far this year, he's won every single moto other than Thunder Valley, only leaving 6 points on the table. That being said, this was a little bit of a rough race for him last year. He did end up landing on that lapper. Seems like most of the struggles that he had last year were from getting bad starts, and based off of the starts we saw last weekend, he might not have that issue this weekend. So probably another rough weekend for everybody else. And I'm sure that Hayden would love to come out here and win RedBud, especially after what happened last year. The next closest guy is going to be Joe Shimoda, and he is now 58 points back. So already a pretty massive lead for Hayden Egan. Joe actually does look pretty good. He went 10-2 for 5th overall last weekend. So he definitely has the speed. I believe he crashed or just got a really bad start in Moto number 1. That being said, after the first 2 rounds, we haven't seen any real consistency out of him. He's had 1 good moto, 1 bad moto, or just 2 okay motos. And now moving up into 3rd, we have Tom Vial. He ended up going 3-3 for 2nd overall last weekend. In typical Tom Vial fashion, he's just stacking points. Other than pulling off in Hangtown Moto number 1, he's been pretty consistent stacking points. At this point, it seems like he could definitely get 2nd overall in the championship if Joe Shimoda continues to be inconsistent. But interestingly, this week it has now come out that there's a pretty good chance that Tom Vial might not actually renew with Red Bull KTM, and he could go back to the GPs next year for factory Honda. Personally, I'd have to agree with Daniel Blair. I think it'd be pretty cool if he did a 450 either part-time or even a full-time Supercross schedule, and as the Supercross season started to wind down, he began fully focusing on his 250 motocross campaign and really came out swinging one more time to try to go out there and win a motocross championship, but it sounds like we might not even see him at all in America next year. 4th in the championship, only 1 point behind Tom Vial, we have Levi Kitchen, and he actually tied Tom in points last weekend, going 2-4 for 3rd overall. I believe that's now 3 weeks in a row that Kitchen has been on the overall podium, so shout out to him with some consistency. He has got a bit lucky because he hasn't necessarily had the overall moto results to be on the podium. He's going like 8-2 for 3rd overall and stuff like that. All that being said, he still looks really good. I think you could argue he's one of the top 3 fastest guys out there. So hopefully he can get 2 good starts this weekend and get a good result. Then rounding out your top 5, only 2 points behind his teammate, we have Garrett Marchbanks. Garrett did have a little bit of a down week last weekend when compared to the rest of his season, going 6-8 for 7th overall. Still a reasonably solid weekend, but you know he wants to be closer to that top 5 and podium range. Remember, he is fighting for a factory ride next season. You know that he wants to stay with the Kawasaki guys, and there's not a lot of other seats open right now. So look for him to try to bounce back this weekend. 6th in the championship right now is Chance Hymas, but obviously he is out. So the next closest rider is going to be Michael Mosiman. And interestingly enough, he's actually in a 3-way tie, 49 points behind Garrett Marchbanks. So quite a ways back, but these next 3 guys are in their own little battle. And they all have their own interesting trajectories. Anyway, starting off with Michael Mosiman. He had a really good weekend last weekend, not nearly as good as what the results page would show. He was well on his way to a podium in Moto number 1, and then he started having some bike troubles towards the end of the race. He was still able to salvage a solid 4th place finish, and then he came back strong in Moto number 2 with a 5th place finish, giving him a 4th place overall. As long as he finishes off the season, it looks like he'll probably be the number 7 seed going into the playoffs, so pretty solid. But apparently not solid enough for Bobby Reagan, because supposedly he essentially told Michael Mosiman that he should retire.
Hey, it's the 2nd time he's told me to retire this year. He told me to retire and I should go work for my dad. So,
personally, I was kind of shocked to hear that. In my opinion, Michael Mosiman's been the 2nd best rider overall on the team so far this year. It doesn't seem like that brought him down too much, and I hope that he continues to be successful, but I am curious to see what team he ends up riding for next year. Anyways, the next rider in the 3-way tie is Mikkel Harup. He actually had a really good day at Southwick, going top 5 in the first moto and then backing it up with a 6th place finish in Moto number 2, finishing 6th overall, just missing out on the 5th place finish being etched out by Joe Shimoda. Anyways, as far as big picture, he's definitely been on the rise. Coming into the season, I predicted he would be the highest in the points as far as Team Triumph riders, and it looked like he was going to be in a bit of a battle with Jordan Smith, but now he's really starting to stretch it out, having much better results. Jalik Swole's definitely looked good since his return, but even with that, Mikkel was still well ahead of him last weekend. He's only 1 point out of a direct transfer into the SMX playoffs main events right now,
But interestingly, the rider in front of him is Ty Masterpool, so essentially as long as he keeps doing what he's doing, he's going to be able to be in all the playoffs rounds. So that's pretty cool to see for him. And then the third rider in this tie is Ty Masterpool. Unfortunately, like I said in the injury updates, he will not be competing this weekend. Really hate to see that for Ty. He was having an okay season, nothing that was great. Definitely some disappointments at times. And this is definitely not the type of thing that anybody wanted to see. Then rounding out the top 10 points behind that battle, we have the first non-factory rider in Max Voland. I'm really happy to see that Max was able to return. He's getting through the full season. He's working things out. Hopefully he can keep building. He went 11-12 for 13th overall last weekend. But at the end of the day, that's still rock solid. He's building. He's well up into the point seeding right now. I think the main thing for him is to just get through this whole season healthy and then come out swinging for Supercross. We saw him have some really good flashes in Supercross this year, winning a heat race and things like that. So like I said, Max is looking good. I'm sure Club is stoked, and I'm stoked to see it as well.
Next, just outside the top 10, 4 points behind Max Voland, we have Seth Hamaker, and he's definitely on his way back up into the top 10. He's only 4 points behind Max Voland, and he did have to miss Thunder Valley with that injury. Last weekend, he went 9-9 for 8th overall, but we've seen him get moto podiums already this season. He's definitely a tick off of what we saw in Supercross, but he's not that far off, and he hasn't raced a lot of motocross in the last few years, so he looks to be building, and he's still recovering from being banged up. I would not be surprised to see him work his way towards being a consistent top 5 guy by the end of the season. 5 points behind Hamaker, we have Jordan Smith, and he's also on his way into the top 10 because you got to consider that Chance Hymas and Ty Masterpool should be falling out of the top 10 since they're not competing. We've seen a lot of ups and downs out of Jordan so far in motocross. Last weekend was a perfect illustration of that, going 14-7 for 10th overall. It's good to see that he does have the speed and the fitness to stay up towards the front of the pack. But remember, this is a guy who's potentially going up to the 450 class next season. That being said, I do have some concerns about the long-term outlook of his career. I definitely feel like he's on a Colt Nichols type trajectory right now. But that being said, he's only 2 years younger than Colt Nichols, and Colt's been in the 450s for a few years now. Overall though, still a pretty solid season. He's top 10 in the SMX seeding. He did get Triumph their first win in Supercross, so it should be interesting to see how he finishes off the season. 5 points behind Jordan, we have Julien Beaumer, and he had a really tough race last weekend. He ended up going 18-22 for 21st overall. Granted, he was coming back from that nasty crash at High Point, but in his own words, he said embarrassed isn't even the right word. So he was definitely not happy with that performance. We do know he's capable of much better finishes than that, but generally speaking, even his better finishes leave a bit to be desired. In 14, 3 points behind Julian, we have Casey Cochran, and obviously he will not be competing for the rest of the season. So the next closest guy is going to be Dylan Schwartz, and he is 17 points behind Julien Beaumer. He's been pretty hot and cold so far this season, with last weekend being one of the cold weekends. He went 16-19 for 18th overall. He's still having a relatively solid season, stacking some pretty good points. Right now in the SMX seeding, he's sandwiched right in between Casey Cochran and Max Anstey, so he should be well within the LCQ range. Then we have to jump back another 9 points to find Ryder DeFrancisco, and it would seem that he's struggling with consistency as well. He's definitely had some really good motos, and he had a lot of speed at Fox Raceway at round number 1. But even last weekend, he just couldn't put 2 good motos together. He went 20-13, which did give him 15th overall, so not terrible. But I know he's capable of getting in there and getting top 10 overall finishes, and right now he's not even doing that in the motos. He definitely has the speed, and he definitely has the talent, so he's another guy I'll be keeping my eye on. 3 points behind Ryder D, we have Drew Adams, and he had to take a couple of weeks off with that broken finger, so he's returning with that this weekend. Hopefully he feels alright. He's been looking pretty solid, especially in moments, but generally speaking, looking at his results, they've been on the downtrend since round number 1, so hopefully he can start to rebuild and regain some of that confidence. In 18th, another 7 points behind Drew Adams, we have Parker Ross. And man, it was so good to see Parker Ross come out here and get another solid result. He had scored 0 points at the last 2 rounds after looking really good at the opening 2 rounds. He said he likes the sand, and he proved that going 13-10, which gave him a 12th place overall finish, just edging out Max Voland for the first non-factory rider in the field. And if he can keep that up, he might just be able to get himself directly into the playoff main events. Remember, he did have a pretty solid Supercross season, and as of right now, he is only 2 points out of that final transfer position. It's still a little bit too early to tell exactly what's likely going to happen, but right now he's locked in a battle with Harrop and Adams for that final transfer spot, but none of those guys are that far behind Austin Forkner. And then there's also Cody Schock and Cullen Park up ahead who are not racing motocross. Well, Cody Schock is, but he's in the 450 class, so they could end up overtaking those guys. It's going to be worth keeping an eye on this battle because being directly into those main events definitely matters, and the LCQ is looking really stacked. But anyways, Parker Ross is looking great. It was awesome to see him bounce back and finally get some good results. Then in 19th, 4 points behind Parker Ross, we have Nate Thrasher, and he ended up going 12-16 for 14th overall last weekend. So really nothing great, but it was at least something. He was able to stack some points and try to keep building for the playoffs. I'm really curious to see what happens with Nate Thrasher long-term in his career. We saw him get another Supercross win this season, and generally speaking, that's kind of been the Nate Thrasher story. Show up, get a Supercross win, and disappear for the rest of the season. Now, I understand he has struggled with some injuries in motocross so far this season, so hopefully he can bounce back and start getting some better results. But if not, like I said, I'm curious what next year looks like. Personally, I feel like Michael Moseman does deserve a slot on that team a little bit more than Nate Thrasher, even though he did get that win. Next, we got to give a shout out to Jalik Swoll. He has already made it into the top 20 in the points after only 2 rounds. Last weekend, he was so close to being in the top 10 overall. He had a great Moto number 1 with a 17th place finish, but then a 15th in Moto number 2 ended up bumping him back to 11th. I believe that was a crash that caused him to fall back at the end of the moto. But even with that crash, still a reasonable overall result. Don't be surprised if he's in contention for a top 5 overall this weekend. Then only 1 point behind him, we have his teammate Austin Forkner. And honestly, this is not a good look. Austin's been racing the entire motocross series. He's on a factory team, the same team, and he already got passed by his teammate in his second race back. So I love having Austin out there. I'm glad that he's staying relatively okay. He has had some crashes, but he's still out there. He is stacking points. He's been racing the entire season, and he is barely inside the top 18 right now. He's going to need to keep getting some reasonable results. Thankfully, he did have an upwards trend this weekend. It wasn't his best weekend of the season so far, but it was much better than High Point. He got 19-14 for 16th overall, so really nothing great, but at least he was scoring points in both motos. Hopefully, he can get through the rest of the season healthy, and maybe he can hit a switch in the offseason and come out swinging in 2026. And then I also want to give a quick shout out to Club MX's Alexander Fedorstov. He had his best weekend of the season so far, going 15-18 for 17th overall. He's still back in 25th in the points right now after not scoring any points at the last 2 rounds, but it's good to see him bounce back and start going on the upwards trend. Moving on to the 450 class. At the top, obviously, we have Jet Lawrence, and he's only left 10 points on the table so far this season. He's won every single overall, and he's now 38 points ahead of Eli Tomac. He is now only 1 win away from tying Ken Roczen for 6th on the overall win list, but interestingly, he has struggled here in the past. Other than his perfect season in his rookie 450 season, if you rewind back to the 250 days, he was only on the podium at RedBud 1 time. That being said, I don't expect him to struggle, but I just thought that was worth mentioning. Then in second, 38 points behind Jet Lawrence, we have Eli Tomac. And shout out to Eli Tomac going out there and representing the US on his 100th career 450 start. Hopefully he can get some good starts this weekend. He's definitely going to need it, as this is statistically his worst track when it comes to average finishes. He has won here 3 times, so he definitely can get it done, but he's also struggled in the past. Then it might surprise you to find out that only 5 points behind Eli Tomac, we have Hunter Lawrence. And shout out to Hunter for stringing together a bunch of second place moto finishes. I'm sure it has to be a little bit frustrating not to get at least a moto win or an overall at this point, because he has beat everybody else in this field so far this season. It's been pretty cool to see Hunter kind of turn it around since he got off to a relatively slow start to the season, and now he's really coming on strong. And now it's almost hard to say who's the second best rider in the championship, whether that's Eli Tomac or Hunter Lawrence. If Hunter keeps trending in the right direction, maybe he'll be the second best guy. In fourth, 9 points behind Hunter, we have Aaron Plessinger. And we definitely saw Aaron struggle a little bit at Southwick last weekend.
He did get a 4th in Moto number 1, but then in Moto number 2, he got 8th, bringing him home in 7th overall. Still pretty solid, and I feel like it's probably an outlier race. I definitely expect him to bounce back this weekend. He did bring home a 2nd place finish here last year, and he's been in the top 5 3 out of the last 4 times he's been here. So he definitely loves RedBud. He's basically America's hero as far as motocross goes. I'm sure he's had this circled on his calendar, and he's been looking forward to it, and I'm sure he's going to be having a blast out there. Another 7 points down, we find Justin Cooper rounding out your top 5. I was kind of surprised to see that he still salvaged a 4th place overall finish last weekend after seeing him pretty far down in the pack. He ended up going 6-5 in the motos, so not incredibly good, but definitely a good salvage from coming pretty far back in the pack. I'm sure he's a bit frustrated to be 5th in the points right now, but he's not that far back, and he definitely can turn it around. If he can get a couple of good starts this weekend, definitely look for him to be in contention for the podium. Now I just want to quickly pause our run through the field here and bring up Chase Sexton because he doesn't have any points so far this season, but he's definitely right here with this group of riders. Chase Sexton was able to get the win here last year, and it was his first win at RedBud. Hypothetically speaking, if he can come out here and get the win, he'll be the first person to win RedBud in the Premier class back-to-back since Ricky Carmichael did it back in the early 2000s. So that would definitely be really cool to see, but he's definitely got his work cut out for him. These other 5 guys are all going to be out there doing their best. I'm curious to see if he comes out and looks refreshed, or if he just comes out there and plays it safe. Either way, it's great to have Chase Sexton back in the field. Anyways, jumping back into the championship chase, in 6th place, 32 points behind the number 32, we have RJ Hampshire. And man, things are really looking up for RJ Hampshire right now. It's great to see him still out here doing his thing. He had a really good result last weekend. Unfortunately, he could only manage an 8th in Moto number 1, but then he broke well into the top 5 in Moto number 2, going 8-4 for 6th overall, almost right there inside the top 5. He has definitely established himself as the overall 6th best rider so far this season. Granted, with Sexton returning and Jorge Prado seeming to figure things out, that might be tough moving forward. That being said, he absolutely loves RedBud. Since 2020, he has won here twice, and his average finish is 2.5. Granted, that was in the 250 class, but nonetheless, you know he loves it here, and he does have some momentum from last weekend, and I think it would be so cool to see him get in there and get a top 5 overall finish. Jumping down another 19 points, we'll find Cooper Webb in 7th. And man, like I said last weekend, this guy consistently gets 7th in the motos, and sure enough, he did just that last weekend. He went 7-7 in the motos for 8th overall. So he's just out there doing his thing, doing his best to hold on to that number 1 seed. He did come out and say that he does care about that. That's why he's out here. He's trying to get it. Whether or not he's going to be able to remains to be seen. But things like beating Aaron Plessinger, just like he did in that 2nd moto, are definitely at least a step in the right direction. Justin Cooper is closing in though, so he's either going to need a little bit of help, or he's going to have to start beating him as well. Nonetheless, it's great to see Cooper Webb out here doing his thing, staying healthy, and getting points. Another 12 points down behind Cooper Webb, we have Joey Savacci. He's right here in 8th, looking really good. It would seem that he's mostly healed from that broken finger that he suffered at the season opener. That being said, he did struggle just a little bit last weekend. He went 13-11 for 12th overall. Still a pretty solid finish, and he's definitely stacking some really good points. And now we finally made it to our reigning MXGP champion, Jorge Prado, who's still 3 points behind Joey Savacci. Granted, it was great to see him turn things around last weekend at Southwick. Had he not crashed in each of the motos, I feel like he probably would have been on the overall podium. But even with that, he was able to manage a top 5 finish. He actually tied for 4th place finish, but the tiebreaker went to RJ Hampshire. One thing that I feel like is not being highlighted quite enough is the fact that Jorge actually does have a bit of experience here at RedBud from Motocross of Nations. So I wonder if he can couple that with a little bit of momentum that he gained from Southwick and try to come out here and really put down some good speed. We definitely saw the flashes last weekend. Maybe we could see them again this weekend, and he could actually follow through the whole moto without crashing. And then rounding out your top 10, we have his teammate Jason Anderson, and he is 16 points behind Jorge Prado. So on paper, it almost feels like their seasons haven't even been that different. You have to consider that Jason Anderson didn't even score any points last weekend. He was outside of the top 30, both motos. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any real story behind what happened to Jason Anderson. He did line up for and compete in both motos. He just was way off the pace. I'm not sure why this wasn't talked about more throughout the week, but I am curious to see if he can bounce back and be closer to the top 10 this weekend. Definitely something worth keeping an eye on as the season draws to a close and we know that Anderson is exiting the team. 17 points behind Anderson, we have Malcolm Stewart, and I just want to start out by giving a shout out to Malcolm and FXR for that really cool gear that they put together in memory of Aiden Zing for press day. I thought that was really cool. Also shout out for Malcolm being able to bring home a top 10 overall finish last weekend. Definitely a step in the right direction. Looks like he was pretty strong in that second moto. And it's just great to have Malcolm out there. Not a whole lot more I can say about him. Then only 2 points behind Malcolm, we have Cody Schock. And I'm really glad to see that Cody Schock is holding his own in this class. I definitely had a little bit of concerns, but we've seen him do pretty good in the 450s before. Granted, that was an entirely different field at that time. His overall wasn't that impressive at Southwick, but that was mainly due to the first moto where he got 18th, and he bounced back really well with a 12th in moto number 2. All in all, I feel like Cody's a great character, brings a lot to the sport, and he's also riding really well. Technically, I think he could race SMX on the 250 or the 450, so I'm interested to see exactly which way he goes on that. He does still have a little ways to go if he wants to get into the top 18 in the 450s and qualify directly into the mains. Right now he's in 22nd, but it looks like it could be in the realm of possibilities depending on how things go. That being said, if he doesn't race any 250 motocross, it's also possible that he might fall outside of the top 18 on the 250 side of things. So interesting dynamic there. It's worth mentioning that one 450 race that he did at Daytona where he actually scored some pretty significant points might make a pretty big difference come the end of the season. 13th in the championship, actually tied with him right now, is Benoit Patrel. And he technically had a slightly better day than Cody Schock, going 14-14 in the moto, so slightly outscoring him. But Cody Schock did get that 12th in moto number 2. So these guys have been kind of going back and forth. But we saw Cody Schock well inside the top 10 at High Point. So it's hard to say which guy is trending in which direction. They've both been inside the top 10 this season. They're both very capable riders. And then only 1 point behind those two, we have another foreign rider in Valentin Guillot. And he actually ended up going 16-15 for 15th overall, right behind Cody Schock last weekend. So pretty interesting to see how this all shakes out. These three guys right here could potentially end up battling for the final spot into the playoffs. Right now, Cody Schock definitely has the edge from that Daytona race, like I said, but some pretty cool back and forth going on here. Then we have to jump another 20 points back to round out our top 15, and that's where we find Harry Koulas. Interestingly though, Harry Koulas smoked all of them last weekend, getting a 9th in moto number 1 and backing that up with a 13th in moto number 2, finishing just outside the top 10 in 11th. So personally, that was a lot better than I was expecting. We all know he's pretty capable, but we haven't really seen that out of him so far this season. So I don't know if that was just the sand playing to his strengths, but either way, it was great to see Harry Koulas have a really great ride. He did kind of the same thing last year. He did really good at Southwick, and then he backed it up at RedBud. So keep an eye out for Harry this weekend. Then we have to jump another 6 points back to find Colt Nichols. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about Jordan Smith being on that similar trajectory to Colt Nichols. Not that it's a bad thing, he's right here scoring points, but definitely a little bit of a disappointment. Similar to Jason Anderson, I'm not sure exactly what was going on last weekend, but he was well outside of the top 30 in both motos. He did a little bit better in Moto 2, but still not anywhere near where he should have been. We've seen him running a lot closer to the top 10 earlier on in the season, so we know he's capable of at least that. I'm sure if he would have scored some points last weekend, he wouldn't be so far back in the points right now. It sounds like he might have had a little bit of a hard time getting his bike restarted after some tip overs last weekend, so hopefully that's all it was, and hopefully he can bounce back this weekend. 17th in the championship, only 3 points behind Colt Nichols, we have Grant Harlan. He did struggle a bit last weekend, going 17-17 for 18th overall, but remember, he's still racing with broken ribs, so the fact that he's out there scoring points is pretty incredible. Then 18th in the championship, another 12 points back, we have Mitchell Harrison, and unfortunately he wasn't able to continue that upwards trend that he's been on. I believe he got 13th at High Point, but then at Southwick he went 19-19 for 19th overall, so still scoring points, still solid, but not quite as good as we had been seeing. Another 7 points back in 19th, we have Lorenzo Locorcio, and he actually had a pretty good showing at Southwick. He brought home a 15 and 16 in the motos, giving him 16th overall. Remember, he did skip around, I believe he did not race Thunder Valley. So he would probably be a little bit higher up in the points if it weren't for that. Only 1 point behind Leccorcio, we have Derek Kelly, and he ended up only scoring points in one moto last weekend, bringing home an 18th in moto number 2. But he's been kind of hit and miss so far this season. Pretty much that sums up his season so far. But he definitely has the speed at times. He's had a couple of really good motos. The depth in this 15 to 25 range is pretty deep, and there's some really good battles that happen week in and week out. And then if we jump another 5 points back, that's where we'll find Justin Barcia. He already has 25 points after only racing Southwick, so it's great to see Justin back in the series. He actually rode really well. He was top 10 in both motos and ended up bringing home a 9th place overall finish. And before we completely move on from the 450s, I also want to bring up Antonio Cairoli again. So remember, he is debuting the Ducati this weekend. We haven't seen him race in American Motocross since 2022, where he raced the first 5 rounds of the series, and then he also competed at this track in the Motocross of Nations. So he is familiar with the format, he's familiar with this track, so I'm really curious to see exactly where he ends up finishing. He's made it pretty clear that this is definitely mainly for testing. He's not out here to try to prove anything. He's already done that. He's proven everything that he needs to prove. But nonetheless, it's great to have him back out here with us, and it's going to make getting a top 10 just that much harder for everybody else. Moving on to the weather and schedule. The weather's looking pretty good, a little bit warm, but no rain in the forecast, so that's nice to see. Shouldn't get much over 90 degrees. And then as far as the schedule, Race Day Live will be kicking off at 10 Eastern. 450s will be going first, starting at 1 Eastern. Interestingly, that's once again because of the NBC schedule, but only 450 Moto number 2 will be live on NBC, so kind of weird. But anyways, 450s first, then 250s, starting at 1 Eastern. And now let's get into some rider statistics. Whether you guys are betting or just playing fantasy, this section is for you. So the first rider we're going to talk about is Jet Lawrence, and really there's not a whole lot to say. While I did mention the fact that he has had his struggles here in the 250 class, he has only ever lost one 450 overall in his whole career. If I was going to try to convince you that he's not going to win, I would say things like, yes, he struggled on the 250s. Eli's already beaten him twice this year. Chase Sexton's coming back. The field is deep. Prado is figuring it out. But at the end of the day, it's Jet. He's pretty much guaranteed to win. As far as Eli Tomac, the last time we saw him here, which was in 2022, he did go 1-1, taking home the overall win. But as I mentioned earlier on in the show, statistically, this is his worst track when it comes to average finish position. Granted, he did have a DNF in one of the motos in 2018, which did give him a 15th place overall, slightly skewing that. But nonetheless, he has had his issues here in the past. Looking at his average position on the first lap, he's at a 6.4 right now, which isn't terrible. It's about the 5th best out of everybody. But what that does tell you is that generally speaking, he's at the back of this top 5 pack, and they're all pretty fast. He's even averaging a 3.3 finishing position, which is actually worse than what Hunter Lawrence has right now. So the only reason he's holding on to second in the points is because of his moto wins. And then looking at Hunter, a lot of good things can be said. He has the 2nd best average position on the first lap at 3.3, and he also has the 2nd best average finish at 3.2. He has 4 second place moto finishes in a row right now, and he was on the podium here last year behind the 2 KTM boys. Next, let's look at Chase Sexton. The last 3 times he's been to RedBud, he's been on the podium, and he won here last year. Listening to some press day interviews, he claimed that part of the reason he was out for so long this last few weeks is because he's been actually dealing with some nagging stuff since before Supercross. And essentially, he's just been dealing with it, and now he's actually feeling a lot better. He says he's happy to come back. He's excited to go racing. I'm not sure exactly how much of that is true. Could be all of it, could be part of it. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Obviously, we don't have any data as far as motocross this season, but he is your defending champion, and he did win here last year, so I do think he'll probably be at least in the top 5. Who knows exactly what would happen beyond that. As far as Aaron Plessinger goes, he definitely loves RedBud. He's obviously a true American patriot, and this is America's weekend. This track is where he got his first ever 450 laps led. He finished 2nd here last year. He has the 3rd best average starting position right now, not that far off of Hunter Lawrence with a 4.6. And he does have his average finishing position all the way down at a 3.9, which is 4th, not that far behind Eli Tomac. So I think it's fair to kind of wash away the little bit of struggles that he had last weekend at Southwick and expect him to bounce back strong this weekend. Hard to say exactly where Chase Sexton and Jorge Prado are going to mix into all of this. But so far, up until Southwick, we've had a very clear-cut top 5, and now that's becoming murkier with these 7 riders. Moving on to the guy who has essentially been bringing up the rear of that top 5 pack. Generally speaking, we have Justin Cooper, and he actually has your 4th best average starting position, just slightly in front of Eli Tomac right now with a 6.3, and he does seem a bit start dependent. He can work his way through the field up to the top 5. We haven't seen him charge through this top 5 pack very well. That being said, he can hold his own once he's already up there. But right now the data shows that he's usually not ahead of these guys, and that's why he is 5th in the points right now. His average finishing position is at 4.4, which is the 5th best, which is pretty crazy to have the whole top 5 all have their average finishing position under 5. And then if you guys are playing fantasy and you're trying to sort out your top 5, I do think you should consider Jorge Prado. He's definitely been hot and cold, mostly cold so far this season, but we definitely saw some sort of resurgence at Southwick, and I do think that might not just be the sand. I expect that to transfer over a little bit at some point. Could be this weekend. He has become familiar with the format, and he does have experience here at RedBud during the 2022 Motocross of Nations. I'm curious to see just how much he can sort it out, because if he does not start sorting it out soon, I'm not sure we're going to see him racing here in the US much longer. That being said, I do think it would be foolish to completely count him out this weekend, and I would not be surprised if he does end up in the top 5. And then looking at the Rocky Mountain Fantasy League, the wild card this week is 8th place, and keep in mind we have already talked about 7 guys. So essentially, if you think these are the best 7, which I generally do, then we have to decide who is the best of the rest. And looking at the results so far this season, there's really only 2 guys that it should be. If it's anybody else, then something pretty catastrophic happened. So it's either going to be RJ Hampshire or Cooper Webb. Unless you want to consider the potential of something like Jorge Prado messing up in a moto, or Justin Cooper having a bad moto and maybe one of them getting 8th overall. But if we're strictly looking at statistics, I think that RJ Hampshire is the best pick. He did grab himself a 6th place overall last weekend, but that was with Aaron Plessinger having a bit of a bad Moto 2 and finishing behind RJ in the overalls. I don't think that'll happen this weekend, so by the time you add Aaron back and then throw Chase Sexton in there, RJ's now in 8th. That being said, there is something to say about RJ Hampshire being very successful here at RedBud specifically. Looking at his results in the 250 class, since 2020 he has won here twice, and his average finish position is in the low 2s. So maybe he can carry that momentum from that good moto finish in Moto 2 last weekend, and the fact that he likes it here, maybe he could be in the top 5. Personally, I think that's probably a stretch. And then if you look at Cooper Webb, he has finished in 7th in pretty much all of the motos that have been quote-unquote normal for him. So simply put, if you just add Chase Sexton back into the series, now he's finishing in 8th. Maybe Cooper Webb finds a way to get 8th. That's probably an oversimplified way of looking at it, but sometimes that is the best way of looking at it. So as most of you know, RedBud is a very special track at a very special time of year. It's a great tradition. It's a great stop on the motocross circuit. It's a very iconic track, hosting 2 Motocross of Nations just in the last decade. And it also has one of, if not the most iconic jumps in motocross with Larocco's Leap. So I went ahead and put together this little story video to kind of showcase for you guys just how cool the RedBud facility is and how awesome their story is, as well as just how cool the origin story of Larocco's Leap is and all the changes that it's been through throughout the years. So the start of this story is going to take us all the way back to the early 1970s, where we would find Gene Ritchie, who had traveled to Buchanan, Michigan for a snowmobile race. So while Gene was there for a snowmobile race, he also had quite the passion for motocross racing. So while Gene was out riding his snowmobile, he came to a stop near where the announcer's tower is now at RedBud, and he thought to himself, man, this would be a really good place for a motocross track. Gene ended up talking to the landowner, and come to find out, he was actually looking to sell the place anyways. One thing led to another, and Gene purchased the land that has since become the RedBud motocross track.
The Richies ended up partnering with 2 other families, and initially there was some pushback from the local community against the motocross track, but in 1973 they ended up having their first races at RedBud, and then in 1974 they had their first AMA National. So over the years the track began to solidify itself as a solid stop on the National Series. The Richies ended up becoming the sole owners of the track, and they began to win over the Buchanan community. So if we fast forward about 25 years to 1991, there's a local hero named Mike LaRocco, and he wants a practice track at his home in Indiana. Now while Mike does live in Indiana and RedBud is in Michigan, Mike lives in northern Indiana and Buchanan is in southern Michigan, so really it's actually kind of down the street for him, and that's like his local track. So Mike knows Tim, the son of Gene, very well, and he ends up partnering with Tim for him to come down and build him a practice track. So Tim comes down to Mike's place in Indiana, he builds him this awesome practice track, and on the practice track, one of the things that they built is around a 150-foot jump that they nicknamed Kong. So practice track is built, Mike jumps on there, and he does a few laps, and then eventually he ends up sending it all the way up and over Kong, and Tim is standing right there, and I am paraphrasing here, but he pretty much says, "Holy crap, dude, that was amazing. I gotta put that on our track." So Tim goes home and he tells his dad, Gene, he's like, "Dude, we gotta put a big jump on the track. It's the only option. It's gonna be amazing. We have to do it." Initially, Gene is apprehensive towards the idea, but eventually he caves in and lets Tim build the jump. So Tim gets to work moving the dirt, and Mike actually pulls up next to him, and while he wasn't necessarily moving the dirt with Tim, he was there to help him with things like the distance, the angle, and things like that. So they go and they build this nice big jump. So now it's 1992, and it's time for the National to return to the track. In the days leading up to the race, Mike does end up jumping over the jump and clearing it, and there are some versions of the story that even say that initially he jumped to flat, and that's how they decided where to put the landing. Then come race time, Mike shocked a lot of people when he ended up jumping it on his KX 125, and while he had already jumped it before, a lot of people had not seen it or didn't know about it, and it was pretty impressive to see him doing it in a race. Later on that day, some of the 250 guys did end up jumping it as well, but Mike was the first person to ever jump it in competition. So because of Mike's involvement and the way he jumped it first, the jump became known as LaRocco's Leap. As the years went on, the leap became quite an iconic jump. Everybody knew to gather around LaRocco's Leap to see guys flying high through the air. Many iconic pictures were taken there, and many iconic moments have happened on the jump. Generally speaking, the smaller displacement bikes have always struggled to get up and over the jump. Many times, only 1 or 2 guys in the class will jump it, or none of them will. There's a handful of guys that come to mind that jumped it on the 125s back in the day, like James Stewart, Ernesto Fonseca, Travis Pastrana, and a few others. There's a really cool photo of James Stewart jumping it in 2002. And there's some more recent iconic moments, like in 2012, when Blake Baggett was the only one jumping it in the 250 class, and he was jumping it pretty much every lap. In the more recent years, it has been a little bit more common for the smaller displacement bikes to jump it, but it's still usually just a handful of guys that are doing it, and it really does separate the field. After about 25 years since the Leap was originally built, it was time for a change. In 2017, the Leap was moved about 80 feet to the south while making preparations for the 2018 Motocross of Nations. The previous location's grandstands had been washed away in a storm, so that combined with the opportunity to host the Motocross of Nations sparked an interesting track change where they completely moved LaRocco's Leap. Just like when LaRocco's Leap was built the first time, Tim partnered back up with Mike, and they essentially made an exact replica of the jump just a little bit south of where the old jump was. The height and the distance of the jump stayed just about the same, but one of the big changes that they did make was they did make the landing quite a bit taller, which allowed the guys to have a smoother landing as long as they landed on the backside of the jump. Additionally, new, larger grandstands were erected next to LaRocco's Leap to allow fans to watch the spectacle that is LaRocco's Leap unfold. Along with the new location of LaRocco's Leap came a new approach. They originally built an interesting S-turn type approach to the jump, which was eventually scrapped for a traditional 180-degree left-hand turn approach. Another interesting change that they made to the track that was not involved with LaRocco's Leap is they moved the start straight to change the orientation from being a left-hand sweeping turn to a right-hand 180-degree turn. This allowed for better placement of the large mechanics tower that came along with the Motocross of Nations race. For the most part, the track stayed in this configuration all the way through 2022, when Motocross of Nations returned once again to RedBud, and it was quite a race. In 2022, the Americans ended up taking home the Motocross of Nations win, adding another iconic moment to RedBud's legacy. In preparations for the 2023 National, some more track changes were made. The starting gate was moved back to its original position, the wall jump towards the beginning of the track was replaced with a double, and most notably, the approach to Larocco's Leap was changed entirely. For the first time since Larocco's Leap was rebuilt in 2017, it would have a 90-degree turn approach. To accomplish this, they basically skipped past the roller section and the tabletop that was originally before Larocco's Leap and just headed straight for it and then turned left and hit the jump. The idea behind that was to allow more of the 250 riders to be able to get up and over the jump, but there was a little bit of controversy as well because there was some pretty interesting separation between going to the inside and doubling the triple versus having to go all the way to the outside, railing the turn and trying to send it up and over the triple. Once it was race time though, only a few handful of riders ended up jumping the jump. We even saw guys like Hunter Lawrence, who was leading Moto number 1, out in front of the race and still opting to double Larocco's Leap. So while there were concerns that it would make the jump too easy, it definitely did not. The jump is always going to be massive, it's always going to be intimidating, and it's always going to be fun to watch in whatever configuration they leave it in. As we head back to RedBud for the 2024 National Series, they have made some changes to the track once again. They moved the start back to where the first turn will now be a 180-degree right-hand turn, but their approach to Larocco's Leap remains unchanged. It seems that the general consensus is that the more people that can jump the jump, and the more people that are flying through the air, the better. Now I'm not against that, but personally I do miss the 180-degree approach just a little bit. But either way, it's always awesome to see those guys hitting Larocco's Leap and racing at RedBud.
That being said, I'd be curious what you guys think if you have an opinion on the approach to Larocco's Leap. And also let me know down in the comments below, who do you guys have on the podium this weekend? If you guys made it through the entirety of the video, thank you so much for sticking around, and I will see you guys in the next video.